The real reason Earth never brings its army to peace summits. Part 1. The Invitation. The message came in on a quiet Tuesday morning, and it was polite in the way that only people who think they are better than you can be polite. Ambassador Leon Hartley read it at his desk, with a cup of black coffee going cold beside him. The message was from the Galactic Conclave, a body of 31 alien species that had been running the known galaxy like a very old and very slow committee for the past 600 years. They were inviting Earth to the 114th Summit of Enduring Peace, to be held on the neutral world of Varathi Prime. The message reminded all attending species, in careful and firm language, that military vessels, war weapons, and armed escorts of more than 12 soldiers were not allowed anywhere in the Varathi system. Leon put the message down. He looked out the window at the gray morning sky over Geneva. Then he smiled. His assistant, Carla Novak, was standing in the doorway with a second stack of papers. She had been working with Leon for 3 years. She had learned that his smile, when it looked like that, meant something unusual was coming. "Should I tell the Defense Council?" she asked. "No need," Leon said. "We will send the usual delegation." Carla wrote it down without saying anything. She had learned not to ask what the usual meant. It never had a short answer. The Varathi system was a quiet corner of space, chosen specifically because no major power had any strong interest in it. The planet itself was green and cold, with long flat plains and a sky that turned purple at sunset. The orbital station above it was large and well lit, built by conclave engineers over the course of a century. It had wide corridors, a dozen reception halls, and a medical wing that had never been seriously used. The conclave considered it one of their finest neutral venues. Species began arriving a week before the summit. The Veth came first. Their ships were beautiful, in a way that was almost aggressive about it, crystal-sided and slow-moving, scattering light as they entered orbit. Their delegation was 400 strong, and arrived dressed in robes that had apparently taken several artisans a full year to make. Then came the Granok, heavy and slow in their cathedral ships, gray-skinned and 7 feet tall, their ceremonial armor polished to a bright shine, even though it had not been used in real combat for 8 centuries. The Ilari arrived in small, nervous flocks of short-range shuttles, their bird-like bodies wrapped in layered travel clothes, their large, round eyes scanning every new space before they entered it. Every species brought their guards. Every species made sure the guards were visible. It was a tradition almost as old as the conclave itself. You came in peace, but you made sure peace knew you could afford not to. Then the human ship arrived. It came in without announcement, without escort, without so much as a formal entry broadcast. It was a single vessel, roughly the size of an ocean liner back on Earth, white and mostly smooth, with no visible weapon ports, and no military markings of any kind. It matched the orbital station's docking frequency, and slid in quietly, the way a commuter train pulls into a station at the end of a long day. Delegate Commander Voreth of the Granok was in the observation deck when it docked. He watched it for a long moment. "Scan it," he said to his aide. The aide, a younger Granok named Det, ran the scan. "No weapons," he said. "No military shielding. Life signs consistent with approximately 200 humans." Voreth turned his head slowly toward Det. 200. "Yes, sir." Voreth had brought 1,200 soldiers, and called it a ceremonial detail. He had cut it down from 3,000, because the conclave's invitation had been very firm about the word ceremonial. "Scan it again," he said. Det scanned it again. The result was the same. 200 humans, no weapons. Not even a flag on the hull. Voreth stood there for a while, looking at the human ship the way you look at a word you have read many times, but have suddenly stopped understanding. Then he turned and went back inside without saying anything else. Leon Hartley stepped off the docking shuttle and onto Varathi Station at 1400 hours. He was wearing a plain dark jacket and comfortable shoes. He had a small bag over one shoulder. He looked like a man arriving at a business conference in a mid-sized city somewhere in the northern part of Earth. Not like a man representing an entire species at the most politically significant gathering in the known galaxy. Behind him came Carla with 3 bags and a tablet she had not stopped looking at since takeoff. Behind her came Paul Denny, the delegation's logistics coordinator, a broad-shouldered man in his 40s who had spent 15 years running maritime supply routes before joining the diplomatic service. He was carrying 2 tablets and wearing the expression of someone running calculations in their head. Behind Paul came Nina Osei, the cultural liaison, who spoke 9 alien languages and was already making quiet observations about the corridor layout. Then came the rest. 46 support staff. No uniforms, no visible weapons, just people in practical clothes with bags and tablets and the calm, unhurried movement of individuals who were comfortable in new spaces. The Veth observer, stationed near the docking gate, watched them come through, and then turned to her colleague and said something in their own language that translated roughly as, "There is something wrong with the way they walk." Her colleague looked. The humans were walking normally. They were talking quietly among themselves. A few were already looking at maps of the station on their tablets. "They look fine," her colleague said. Chereth, the senior Ilari diplomat, had dealt with humans on 3 previous occasions. She had found them friendly, easy to talk to, quick to laugh, and profoundly difficult to fully read. She watched the delegation come through the gate from a distance, her large eyes moving from face to face. None of the humans had their backs to the entrance. Not a single one. They were standing in the arrival area, looking at maps, exchanging words, accepting the small welcome packets the station's automated systems were distributing, and every one of them could see every door in the room. They had done it without looking, without pausing, without any kind of signal between them, as if it were simply how they stood. Cherith made a note in her personal log. Then she went to introduce herself to the ambassador, because that was the polite thing to do, and because she had learned that with humans, it was always better to know which ones had names. Leon shook her hand warmly and introduced her to Paul, who smiled and asked what the food was like on the station. Nina Osei appeared at Cherith's other side and immediately began talking to her in fluent Ilari, which caught Cherith so off guard that she answered 3 questions before she remembered she had not planned to talk to anyone yet. Behind them, the rest of the delegation had already begun to spread out through the station. Quietly, naturally, the way water finds its way into every part of a new container without ever seeming to try. The real reason Earth never brings its army to peace summits. Part 2. The Delegation. The first full day of the summit began with a formal reception in the main hall of Varathi Station, a large and well-lit room with tall ceilings and long tables covered in food that had been carefully chosen to be edible by as many species as possible. The result was a spread that looked interesting and tasted, depending on who you were, somewhere between acceptable and deeply confusing. The human delegation arrived on time. Not early, not late, just exactly on time, which the Granok observers found subtly irritating, because the Granok considered arriving exactly on time to be a mild form of aggression. Leon Hartley moved through the room with ease. He was one of those people who could talk to anyone about anything and make them feel, for the duration of the conversation, that their topic was the most interesting one in the room. He spoke with the Veth delegation about their crystalline ship designs. He spoke with 2 junior Granok diplomats about the differences between their northern and southern food traditions. He made the Ilari cultural secretary laugh at something which was considered nearly impossible because Ilari cultural secretaries were selected in part for their ability not to laugh at things. Behind him, the delegation worked the room. Paul Denny found a spot near the east wall and stood there with a plate of food he was mostly not eating. He was watching the room the way a man watches a river he is about to cross. He noted the exits. 6 doors, 3 of them large enough for a Granok in full armor. He noted the positions of the station's security cameras, placed at intervals that left 2 small gaps in coverage near the back corner and the serving alcove. He noted that the Granok guards standing along the far wall were carrying something under their robes on the left side, short and flat, almost certainly ceremonial blades. He also noted that the Veth delegation's table was positioned closer to the main door than any other, which either meant they had arrived early enough to choose their seats, or that someone had given them priority placement. He filed that away. Nina Osei was deep in conversation with an Ilari linguist about a disputed translation in the Conclave's founding charter. She was doing this while also listening to the conversation happening 6 feet to her left between 2 Granok senior delegates, which was in Granok low register and concerned whether the human delegation's small size was an insult or a strategy. She did not look at them once. She just listened and talked and laughed at the right moments and kept drinking her water. Dr. Karl Voss was near the refreshment station, talking with the station's head of medical services, a Veth named Sorval. They were discussing cross-species pharmaceutical interactions. Karl had a gentle, easy manner that made people feel comfortable telling him things. Within 20 minutes, he knew the location of the station's emergency medical supply cache, the combination of species-specific medications currently stocked, and the fact that Sorval had not slept well in 2 days because the atmospheric mix in his quarters was slightly off. Karl made a note of the atmospheric mix issue. He also made a note of the supply cache location. He put them in the same mental file, because in his experience those 2 kinds of information had a way of becoming relevant at the same time. By the end of the first evening, 7 other members of the human delegation had, through completely normal conversation, learned the emergency override procedures for 3 of the station's 6 main sections, the daily rotation schedule of the Granok security detail, and the best route between the main hall and the docking bay if you needed to move quickly and quietly. None of them had asked directly for any of this. They had just talked. They were very good at talking. Delegate Commander Voreth had dinner that evening with his senior staff, and found himself unable to explain why he was unsettled. "They are polite," said his second, a female Granok named Bessa, more polite than expected. "It is not the politeness," Voreth said. "They are unarmed," said his security chief, a veteran named Oreth. "They have no weapons on them," Voreth corrected. "That is not the same thing." No one at the table said anything for a moment. "Watch the one called Denny," Voreth said finally, "the logistics man. I want to know where he goes and what he looks at." Oreth assigned 2 of his people to the task. By the next morning, they reported back. Paul Denny had spent part of the previous evening in the Eastern Maintenance Corridor, which was publicly accessible but not commonly visited. He had been alone. He had not taken anything or left anything. He had just walked through it slowly, the way a person walks through a room they are trying to memorize. When asked, through the station's civilian inquiry system, why he had been in the maintenance corridor, Paul said he liked to know where things were. He said it pleasantly, as if this were a completely normal and boring thing to say. Oreth reported this to Voreth, who sat with it for a while. He was mapping the corridor. Voreth said, "Yes, sir." Why would a logistics coordinator map a maintenance corridor? Oreth had no answer. On the second day, Nina Osei gave a short informal talk to a group of junior diplomats from 4 species about human linguistic history. It was engaging and worn, and full of small jokes that translated well. Afterward, 3 of the junior diplomats told their supervisors it was the best informal session of the summit. What their supervisors did not know was that Nina had used the session to observe the body language patterns of 4 different species under the social condition of relaxed engagement. She was building a reference map in her head. Not for any specific purpose, just because it was useful to know how an Ilari junior diplomat held their shoulders when they were comfortable versus when they were uncertain, or how a Granok's secondary jaw shifted when they were paying more attention than they were showing. She did this the way other people did crossword puzzles, just to keep the mind moving. Carla Novak spent much of the second day doing what she always did, managing schedules, handling incoming messages, preparing briefing notes. She was very good at her job, and very easy to underestimate, which suited her perfectly. While sorting through the day's communications, she noticed that 3 messages from different conclave members had all used the same unusual phrasing in their subject lines, a phrasing that did not match conclave standard protocol. She flagged it in a separate document and sent it to Leon without comment. Leon read it, nodded to himself, and did not bring it up in any official session. That evening, the Alari Cultural Secretary found himself talking to Paul Denny again. Paul had brought a small card game, a simple human game that involved numbers and a certain amount of bluffing. He had already taught it to 3 of the Granok guards, who had taken to it with unexpected enthusiasm. The Cultural Secretary watched them play for a while. "Is this game popular on Earth?" he asked. "Very," Paul said, dealing cards without looking at them. "We like games where you have to guess what the other person is thinking." The Cultural Secretary thought about this. "Most species prefer games of skill," he said. "So do we," Paul said. He looked at his cards. "We just think this is a skill." He won that round. He had won every round. But the Granok guards did not seem to mind, because they were having a good time, and because Paul had at some point during the game quietly returned the small tool he had borrowed from one of their belts the day before. He placed it back so smoothly that the guard did not notice until hours later, and spent a confused few minutes trying to remember if he had ever actually lost it. The real reason Earth never brings its army to peace summits. Part 3, The Incident. The Keth arrived on the 3rd day, and they did not knock. Their warship came into the Varathi system at speed, broadcasting on every open frequency in a tone that left very little room for interpretation. The message was simple. The Keth had a problem with the Alari delegation. The problem concerned territorial boundaries in a region of space called the Drath Corridor. The Keth considered the matter unresolved, the Alari considered it ancient history, and the Keth warship parked in high orbit above Varathi Prime, as a way of saying that their side of the argument had more mass. The conclave went immediately into a state that could charitably be described as organized panic. Emergency sessions were called. Senior delegates argued in 7 languages at once. Procedural motions were filed, disputed, amended, and filed again. The Veth wanted to send a formal protest. The Granok wanted to respond with their warships, which were still technically outside the Varathi system, and could therefore be argued to not technically violate the summit's rules if one used a generous enough definition of the word outside. 3 smaller species quietly asked if there was an early transport off the station. The Alari delegation locked themselves in their quarters. In the main conference room, Orvalis the Veth, serving as the summit security coordinator, laid out the situation to the assembled senior delegates. The station had no weapons capable of engaging a Keth warship. The nearest conclave patrol was 6 hours away. The Keth had made no specific demand beyond acknowledgement of their territorial grievance, but acknowledgement delivered under the barrel of a warship had a specific political weight that the conclave could not simply absorb. He ended his briefing with the careful language of someone delivering bad news. They were, for the moment, in a position of limited options. Leon Hartley was sitting near the back of the room, very still, listening. When Orvalis finished, Leon raised his hand with the modest politeness of a man who had a simple question, and not, in any way, of a man who was about to do something that would be discussed for years. "What does the Keth commander actually want?" he asked. "Not politically, personally, in this moment." Orvalis paused. It was not the kind of question the briefing had prepared him for. "He wants acknowledgement," he said. "He wants the Alari to say, formally, that the incursion happened." "Has anyone spoken to him directly?" "The Keth do not accept diplomatic contact during active demonstrations of force," Orvalis said. "It is a cultural principle." "I know," Leon said. "I have read about it." He stood up and straightened his jacket. "I am going to call him." The room was quiet, in the way that rooms get quiet when everyone present is suddenly unsure whether they are watching courage or a very slow mistake. Vorath said, slowly and carefully, Ambassador Hartley, the Keth commander will not speak with you. The protocol is clear. The Keth protocol says they do not accept diplomatic contact, Leon said. I am not planning to be diplomatic. He asked the station's communications team for a direct channel to the Keth warship. They gave it to him after a short pause, during which at least 2 senior operators considered whether they should check with someone before doing this, and then decided that the human ambassador had a way of making you feel that checking with someone would take longer than necessary. Leon went into the small communications room off the main corridor. He sat down, alone, in front of the screen. He accepted the channel. For 11 minutes, no one outside that room heard what he said. They heard his voice, a little, through the door. Not the words, just the tone. It was calm. Not the calm of someone trying to be calm, which has a certain tightness to it, but the calm of someone who had already thought through everything that could happen, and was no longer worried about any of it. It was the kind of calm that is, in its own quiet way, more unsettling than shouting. Cherith was standing in the corridor outside the room. She heard it and did not move for the full 11 minutes. When Leon came out, he looked the same as when he had gone in. He picked up a cup of coffee from the cart near the door, drank some of it, and told the communications team they could close the channel. 2 hours later, the Keth warship powered down its weapons systems and left the Varathi system. It filed no formal statement. It sent no final message. It simply turned and went. The main conference room sat in silence for a long moment after the news came through. Then everyone began talking at once, which is what large groups of people do when something happens that they do not fully understand, but are very relieved about. Cherith did not join the noise. She walked directly to Leon, who was standing by the window, watching the empty space where the Keth ship had been. "What did you say to him?" she asked. "I explained the situation," Leon said. "What situation? The tactical situation? The political situation?" Leon finished his coffee. "I explained that he had made a threat in a place that had 200 humans in it, none of whom had anywhere better to be for the next week." Cherith looked at him for a long moment. "I do not understand what that means," she said. "I know," Leon said. He was not being rude. He said it with genuine softness, the way you say it to someone when you are sorry that an explanation would take longer than the moment allows. Paul Denny appeared at Leon's shoulder with a fresh cup of coffee and the quiet efficiency of someone who had been nearby the whole time. He handed the cup over without being asked. "Did he believe you?" Paul asked. "He believed that I believed it," Leon said, "which is close enough." Later that evening, Orvalis requested a private meeting with Leon. He sat across from the ambassador in a small side room and put his hands flat on the table in the Veth gesture. That means, I am asking this sincerely. The Keth commander has faced down 3 Conclave patrol fleets in the last decade, Orvalis said. He did not back down from any of them. I need to understand what you said. Leon thought about it for a moment. Have you ever seen a dog defend its yard? He asked. Orvalis said that he was not familiar with the reference. On Earth, we have an animal called a dog, Leon said. Most of the time, a dog is the friendliest creature you will ever meet. It will sleep in your lap and bring you things and follow you everywhere. But when something comes into its space that it does not recognize as safe, something changes. The dog does not calculate. It does not send a formal protest. It just responds. Orvalis waited. I told the Keth commander that there were 200 humans on this station, Leon said, and that from where I was sitting, his warship looked very much like something coming into the yard. Orvalis was quiet for a moment. That sounds like a threat, he said. I was very polite about it, Leon said, but it was a threat. He took it as information, Leon said, which is what I intended. Orvalis left the meeting and went directly to find Vorith. He repeated the conversation word for word. Vorith listened with the expression of someone who is beginning to understand a joke they heard 3 days ago and are not sure they find it funny. 200 unarmed civilians, Vorith said. That is how their manifest lists them, Orvalis said. Vorith looked out at the orbital view of Varathi Prime, quiet and green below them. I want everything we have on this delegation, he said. Everything. Not the official files, the observations. What our people have actually seen. Orvalis nodded and went to collect it. The meeting took place on the fourth evening of the summit, in a small room that Orvalis had swept for listening devices twice. The second sweep was not because the first one had found anything. It was because the first sweep had found nothing, and for some reason, that felt like a reason to check again. Present at the table were Voreth of the Granok, Orvalis of the Veth, and Shireth of the Ilari. No humans had been invited. This was not accidental. Orvalis opened a data file on the table's display surface. I have gathered observations from our combined security staff over the past 4 days, he said. I want to go through them in order. Voreth nodded. Shireth folded her small hands and waited. The human called Paul Denny, Orvalis began, is listed in the official delegation manifest as a logistics coordinator. In 4 days, without any apparent assignment to do so, he has walked every publicly accessible corridor on this station at least once. He has done this in the hours between official sessions, during meal breaks, and on one occasion, at 0300 hours, when most of the station's non-essential staff were asleep. Why was he awake at 0300? Voreth asked. When our observer asked, he said he has trouble sleeping in new places. A short silence. He also, Orvalis continued, identified the 6 structural choke points in this station where a small number of individuals could control the movement of a much larger group. He did this without any instruments and without any apparent effort. We know he identified them because our observer noted him pausing at each one for approximately 4 seconds and looking at the ceiling. The ceiling, Shireth said. Load-bearing assessment, Voreth said quietly. He had done this himself in hostile environments. You looked at the ceiling to judge the weight of the structure above a choke point. Our observer also noted that he has made personal contact with 11 members of various delegations' security details, Orvalis said. Not official contact, personal. He learned their names. He learned one of the Granok guard's children was sick back home. He brought the guard something from the human ship's food stores that he said might help. An herbal compound of some kind. The guard accepted it, and later described Denny as a very good man. He made friends with our guards, Voreth said. He made friends with our guards, Orvalis confirmed. In 4 days. Voreth said nothing. He was thinking about the fact that you did not make friends with another delegation's guards, unless you either had very good social instincts, or you specifically wanted them to hesitate before pointing a weapon at you. He suspected it was both. Orvalis moved to the next entry. The human called Nina Osei is the cultural liaison. She has given 1 informal talk and attended 6 sessions. In that time, according to our observers, she has demonstrated fluency in 9 languages and partial working knowledge of at least 3 more. She has also, without appearing to do so, collected behavioral profiles on the senior delegates of 5 species. How do you know this? Shireth asked. Because one of our observers has the same training and recognized what she was doing, Orvalis said. He paused. Our observer is a trained intelligence specialist. He said, and I'm quoting directly, that her technique was cleaner than his. The room was quiet for a moment. The medical officer, Orvalis continued, Dr. Karl Voss, visited our medical wing on day 1 for what he described as a routine check-in. He spent 40 minutes with our medical staff. In that time, he learned the location of the emergency supply cache, the current inventory of critical medications, and the atmospheric calibration issues in sections 4 through 6. He also drew up a triage plan for a mass casualty event on this station, using only the equipment currently available in the medical bay. He was asked to do this? Voreth said. No. He did it in his personal time. When asked about it, he said he likes to stay prepared. Prepared for what? Shireth asked. He said, and I am again quoting directly, whatever comes next. Shireth made a small sound that was not quite a word. Orvalis closed that section of the file and opened the next. There are 38 additional members of the delegation that our observers have flagged for similar behaviors. I will not go through all of them, but I will give 3 more examples. He turned the display so they could all read it. A woman named Dana Holt, listed as a communications technician, had spent the better part of day 2 in quiet conversation with a junior vet engineer about the station's power grid. She had asked about the backup systems, the emergency rerouting protocols, and the minimum power requirement to keep life support running if the main systems failed. She had asked all of this in the context of a friendly conversation about engineering, and the junior vet engineer had answered cheerfully because she was pleasant and seemed genuinely interested. A man named Greg Spall, listed as a cultural observer, had attended every open session and sat near the back of each room. Observers had initially dismissed him as quiet and unimportant. On day 3, one of the Granok security staff had tripped near a stairwell. Greg had caught him before he fell, with a speed and steadiness that the Granok guard privately described as not matching the soft-looking man he had assumed Greg to be. A woman named Rosa Lynn, listed as an administrative assistant, had on 3 occasions gently redirected tense conversations between delegates from different species. She had done this so naturally, by introducing a small point of humor or a simple question, that none of the delegates involved had noticed they had been redirected until after it was done. Shirith had observed one of these herself, and only identified it in retrospect when reviewing the day's events before sleep. They are not diplomats, Voreth said. They are also not soldiers, Orvalis said. Not officially. Their records show no military service for any of them. Paul Denny ran supply routes on Earth's oceans. Nina Osei taught at a university. Karl Voss ran a medical clinic in a rural area. Dana Holt worked in communications infrastructure. Greg Spall was a sports coach. A sports coach, Voreth said slowly. For a contact sport, Orvalis said, a very physical one. Voreth sat back. He looked at the ceiling in the way that Granok look at ceilings when they are doing very serious thinking. Then he looked at Chirith. You spoke to the ambassador after the Keth incident. What is your read? Chirith had been quiet for most of the meeting. She had been listening with the careful attention of someone who has a thought they are not yet ready to share. I asked him why Earth never sends military escorts to these summits, she said. Every species brings guards, even the smallest ones. We all consider it basic common sense. What did he say? Orvalis asked. He said Earth does send guards, Chirith said. He said that every human who travels off their world is in some degree a guard. He said they cannot help it. She paused. He used an expression. He said it was baked in. I looked up the phrase. It means something that has become part of the basic material of a thing, something that cannot be separated from it without changing the thing entirely. The 3 of them sat with that for a moment. Then what, Voreth said carefully, is the ambassador? Chirith looked at him. I think, she said, that the ambassador is there to make sure the 200 baked-in guards do not have to do anything that cannot be undone. Nobody said anything after that for quite some time. Outside the swept and quiet room, the station hummed along through the dark, and somewhere in the east corridor, Paul Denny was taking his late walk, pausing at the ceiling joints, mapping the station in his head for no particular reason, except that it was simply the way he was built. The real reason. Earth never brings its army to peace summits. Part 5. The real reason. The summit ended on a Friday. The formal closing session was short and polite, the way closing sessions always are, when the important work has already been done, and everyone is quietly thinking about getting home. Agreements were signed, hands were shaken. The Alari delegation, still shaken from the Keth incident, thanked everyone individually, which took a long time because there were a lot of individuals and the Alari have very thorough manners. Leon Hartley signed the documents, shook the hands, and stood for 3 photographs that would appear in conclave news broadcasts across 31 member species the following morning. He was smiling in all 3. He looked like a man who had attended a pleasant conference and was looking forward to a quiet trip home. Behind him, the delegation was packing up with the same quiet efficiency they had arrived with. Paul Denny was coordinating the logistics with a calm that suggested he had already known what route everything was taking and in what order since the second day. Nina Osei was exchanging contact information with 4 other diplomatic staff from different species, all of whom had genuinely enjoyed talking to her, and most of whom did not fully realize how much they had told her. Dr. Karl Voss was saying goodbye to the station's medical team, who had found his company both pleasant and mildly educational in ways they could not quite put their finger on. Rosalind helped a nervous young Alari junior diplomat carry their bags to the correct docking gate, and gave him directions to the transit desk in his own language, which left him so surprised and grateful that he forgot to be anxious for the rest of the morning. Greg Spall, the sports coach who had never quite explained what he was doing at an interstellar peace summit, spent his last hour on the station sitting with 3 of the Granok guards and finishing the card game that Paul had started 4 days ago. He let the guards win the last round. They seemed to need it. Carla Novak, as always, was the last aboard. She did a final check of every room the delegation had used, not because anyone had asked her to, but because she had never in her professional life left a room without checking it. She found 1 tablet that someone had left behind, a spare jacket that turned out to be Paul's, and a small note in the common room that one of the human delegation had left for the station's cleaning staff, thanking them by name for keeping the East Corridor guest rooms comfortable. The cleaning staff had not expected to be thanked, or known by name. They kept the note. The human ship left the Varathi system without ceremony, same as it had arrived. 1 vessel, no escort, just a clean departure vector and a standard sign-off to the station's traffic control, and then it was gone. Voreth watched it go from the observation deck, same as he had watched it arrive. He stood there for a while after it disappeared from view. 3 months later, a paper was published by a researcher at the Conclave Xenobiology Institute. The researcher's name was Thren, and he was, by the standards of his field, a serious and careful person. He had spent 6 years studying humanity. He had attended 2 previous summits, visited Earth twice, and spent 4 months working alongside a human logistics team on a joint infrastructure project. He had taken careful notes throughout. It had taken him 3 years after that to write the paper, because as he explained in his introduction, the hard part was not finding the evidence. The hard part was deciding how to say what the evidence meant. The paper was titled in plain language, On the Question of Why Humans Do Not Bring Armies to Peace Summits. It was long and carefully argued, and full of citations. Its conclusion, however, was simple enough that it could be understood by anyone. Thren's central point was this: most species in the conclave had, over their long histories, developed a clear division between those who fight and those who do not. Soldiers were trained from youth. Warrior castes were separate from civilian populations. The average member of a conclave species, when placed in a dangerous situation, had limited instincts and limited tools for handling it, because the species had organized itself so that the average member would never need to. Humans had tried this model. It had not worked, or rather, it had never fully taken hold, because the world they had come from had not allowed it. Earth was a planet with large predators on every continent, with dangerous weather, with disease, with a long and often violent history of conflict between human groups themselves. It was not a peaceful nursery that produced peaceful people. It was a pressure system that over tens of thousands of years had produced something very specific. A generalist who could not fully switch off. Every human being, Thren wrote, carried to some degree the ability to read a room for danger, to adapt quickly to new environments, to form fast bonds with strangers, and to respond to a threat with either movement or a kind of improvised, creative problem-solving that did not follow a script. These were not special skills. They were baseline. They were, as Ambassador Hartley had put it to Chirith, baked in. The paper included a full behavioral study of the Varathi delegation. The names had been changed. The subjects were just numbers. Subject 3 had, within the first 72 hours, independently developed 3 viable exit routes for the full delegation in the event the station was boarded. He had not been assigned this task. He simply could not walk a new corridor without doing it. Subject 8 had intercepted 4 near conflicts between delegates of different species over 4 days, using nothing but timing, humor, and a very natural ability to say the right small thing at the right moment. She had done this while also managing a full administrative workload. She had not mentioned it to anyone, because to her it was not a thing that needed mentioning. It was just what you did when you saw tension building in a room. Subject 17 had, in the course of normal medical consultation, assembled a complete emergency response plan for the station that would have been functional within 20 minutes of a major incident. He had done it because, as he said himself, it was a quiet evening, and he had the time. Thren's conclusion was the part of the paper that was later most discussed, most quoted in diplomatic circles, and most quietly filed away in the restricted sections of several conclave members' intelligence archives. He wrote that humans did not bring armies to peace summits, because from Earth's perspective, the question did not fully apply. The distinction between a human soldier and a human civilian was one of training and title, not of fundamental nature. The qualities that made a soldier useful, awareness, adaptability, fast thinking, the ability to function under pressure, to read other people, to hold a situation together by force of will when it was coming apart. These were not special qualities that Earth produced in limited numbers and kept behind military walls. They were ordinary qualities that Earth produced in everyone, and could not seem to stop producing, no matter how peaceful the circumstances. The 200 people at Varathi had not been sent as guards. They had not been sent as soldiers. They had been sent as a delegation, and that was genuinely true. And it also meant something different than it would have meant if any other species had said it. Thren ended the paper with one paragraph that was, for an academic document, unusually direct. He wrote, "The ambassador was not there to lead the delegation in the way a commander leads an army. He was there to lead them in the way a conductor leads an orchestra, to make sure that all of that ability, all of that layered and practiced and instinctive human readiness, stayed organized, stayed proportionate, and did not, under any circumstances, do something that would be very difficult to walk back. The real reason Earth never brings its army to peace summits is not that Earth trusts the peace. It is that Earth has never quite worked out how to leave the army at home in the first place. It brings the people instead, and the people are, without really trying, the army." The paper was read widely. It made some species nervous. It made others thoughtful. A few found it reassuring in a way they could not entirely explain. The way it can be reassuring to finally understand something that has been quietly bothering you for years. Leon Hartley, when a journalist contacted him for a comment, said that he thought Thren was a very fine researcher, and that humanity was sincerely looking forward to the next summit. He was already thinking about who to bring. Carla Novak, sitting across the office from him, looked up from her tablet and said, "The conclave has already sent a preliminary invitation for Summit 115. Leon nodded. "Put it on the calendar." "Should I notify the usual people?" she asked. Leon picked up his coffee. Outside the window, the Geneva sky was gray and ordinary, and very much like a sky that had absolutely nothing going on. "Send the list to Paul first," he said. "Tell him I want his thoughts on the station layout." Carla wrote it down without saying anything. She had stopped asking what the usual meant a long time ago.